Let's say you've just crashed your car. You look around, as you do, and you go, blah, 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 and then you notice, oh my God, the airbags have not deployed. Maybe you think about suing the manufacturer. Let's talk about that. I'm John Cadogan from AutoExpert.com.au, the place where Aussie new car buyers save thousands off their next new cars. Hit me up on the website for that. You've caught me on the hop a bit today. I'm halfway through my 2-week evaluation of the Kia Stinger. If you're interested in that, hit subscribe now and the bell notification icon, and you'll be notified when I push my Stinger review live in just a few days. Halfway through, I've got to say I'm loving it, and this would be one of the best aspects of my so-called job. But the reason I'm coming to you off the cuff is I just got an email from Teg Sethi. And you probably remember Teg. He's the guy from the Lemon Jeep video. He bought a Grand Cherokee. It bit him on the arse multiple times, so he made a video and it got umpteen million views and struck a real blow for lemon car afflicted consumers here in Australia and also around the world. Teg and I stay in touch kind of loosely, and he sent me this case that he's working on now as a bit of a lemon car advocate concerning a guy named Troy. Now, Troy owns a SS Commodore, like a late model Pontiac GTO if you're from America. So Troy does something you should never do, which is fall asleep at the wheel at 70 k's an hour, which I guess is about 40 miles per hour, America. And luckily enough, there is an afterwards for Troy in this situation. So Troy wakes up, and I bet it was a memorable wake-up call. He's parked on the side. There's sundry damage around the car. He's run through a billion little scrubby trees and a fence. So this would have been a violent, brutal, chaotic event. He's woken up, he's looked at the car, there's a great deal of cosmetic damage. The laminated windscreen is smashed. There's a whole bunch of things that are suddenly imperfect about his Chariot. And basically he's looked around and he said, oh my God, the airbag's not deployed. And he's gone into, my car must be defective. I didn't get my fries with that. I had my crash. I want my airbags. Madam, I did not get my happy ending, and I'd like to talk to you about that. So anyway, I'd like to talk to you about that now because it is kind of important. I guess half a dozen times a year I get complaints to that effect through my own inbox, and when I've spoken privately to the members of various car companies, they tell me off the record that their customer care centre has this as one of the most common post-crash complaints. People who did not get their happy ending vis-a-vis airbag deployment. So let's talk about what happens when your airbags actually go off. This segment is rated P for physics, but that's okay because it's also rated HE for happy ending. So to drill down into that, when you actually get your HE rating in a crash, you have to stop thinking about car crashes as one continuous event and break them down into 3 component parts, because every serious car crash is actually 3 crashes all strung together, and it's the 3rd one that kills you. Crash number 1 occurs between the car and whatever it hits. And this is pretty obvious, right? So you've got an unyielding object, the car runs into it, and immediately metal starts to bend. Obviously, it takes energy to bend metal. So energy is robbed from the car's kinetic energy to bend the metal, and the result is rapid deceleration. If you're an engineer or a scientist, you probably view the term deceleration as a kind of bullshit physics term, and that's merely because it's all acceleration, you know, Newton's second law, F equals ma, all of that stuff. Deceleration is just what happens when you've got velocity in this direction and acceleration in that direction. At the moment though, crash number 1, just between you and the thing it hits, causes this rapid acceleration in this direction, slowing you down. And at the moment, but just for a few milliseconds, you and the passengers of your car are completely uninvolved. Just a few milliseconds after crash number 1 starts, you become embroiled in crash number 2. Crash number 2 is the only one of the 3 that occurs between you and the car. And hopefully it occurs just here with the seatbelt. If you're unrestrained, it's even worse. You'll be having crash number 2 with the laminated glass windscreen, and it never ends well if you try to punch a hole through a laminated glass screen with your head. So good safety tip, always wear the belt. But as a consequence of the car accelerating rapidly in this direction and your body having a whole bunch of inertia from its velocity travelling in this direction, those two collide literally here on the seatbelt, and your body starts to interact with the vehicle's restraint systems. But that's okay, because crash number 2 is not going to kill you. It's crash number 3 that chalks you up. We don't even need the car for that. Most of us, we're disinclined to think about ourselves as if we are just machines powered to an extent by some gruesome internal plumbing. But when you think about surviving a crash, that's exactly what you've got to think about. The critical crash, number 3, plays out in exactly this domain. Your internal organs will slosh forward and run into the inside of your skeleton. So in a crash where you hit your head against the glass windshield, your skull will stop moving relative to the windshield, but for a few milliseconds, your brain will keep moving forward owing to its own inertia. It will run into the inside of your skull. The same thing plays out with the major blood vessels and organs in your chest, the ones that can kill you quickly. Your chest will stop moving relative to the seatbelt, but your internal organs keep going thanks to their inertia. And all of these things have load limits. Evolution has not endowed us with great survivability in the context of the changes in energy that are experienced in car crashes, the loads that are imposed. These blood vessels will fail, and if they do, it's all over. So the whole purpose of all of this machinery, these precisely engineered crumple zones, the pyrotechnic seatbelt pretensioners, the airbags that are perhaps visually the most apparent part of crash protection, but really are the last line of defence, all of these things are aimed at one outcome, and that is to extend the duration of the second collision in order to mitigate crash number 3, the one that can kill you. So there's a whole bunch of engineers, there's hundreds of thousands of engineering man hours that jump out of the blocks and try and protect you by mitigating crash number 3. And that's really what this is all about. Obviously, all crashes are different. There's a great deal of variation out there in the real world. So let's talk about lines of defence. The primary line of defence for you in a crash is the structure of the car at the pointy end, because it's very carefully designed to deform in a controlled way and absorb energy, and that limits the amount of load that you experience in crash number 2, and the knock-on effect is it mitigates crash number 3, which can kill you. The next thing that might happen in a crash, and this is all determined by a crash sensor down here somewhere in the floor near the mass centroid of the car, which makes the decision-making process kind of easier. It sometimes says fire off the load-limiting pretensioners in the seatbelt. So these explosive devices fire off and they pull the seatbelt tight, and that has 2 principal benefits. The first one is it yanks you into the seat so that you present in relation to the airbag in an anatomically correct way that maximises the chance that the airbag can protect you. And the second thing it does is basically it eliminates any slack between you and the belt, because you don't want to rush forward and then slam into the belt. You want the belt to be holding you snug and tight. You wouldn't want to drive with the seatbelt as tight as it will be when those bolts fire off. But in a crash, with those high loads being imposed on you, you definitely want the seatbelt that tight. So a good safety tip is don't do this. Don't grab the wheel and then reach down here into your bag to fish around for whatever, your lippy, your phone, the bottle that the baby has just dropped, any of that stuff. If you do and you crash and you are out of position like this and those bolts fire off, it could break your collarbone, your clavicle, and that's going to be bad. The knock-on effects of that in a crash could be very bad as well. It might puncture your lung. It's certainly going to be painful, and there will be weeks to months of recuperation. So you also don't want to have your hand like this as you reach, because if the airbag deploys, it's going to blow your forearm into your head at 300 k's an hour, which is the approximate deployment speed, and it's also going to spoil the life-saving protection offered by the airbag. So don't do that. These devices are not risk-free when they deploy, but in this life-threatening crash scenario that you might one day be in, This is a little bit like having cancer. It's bad. We've got chemotherapy. Chemotherapy ain't fun, but it's better than not chemotherapy in many cases. So airbags and pretensioners, they're like that. It's the best we've got in the middle of a very grim situation indeed. And this is, of course, why the engineers who develop this technology don't deploy any of this stuff in a trivial fashion. It's not like, would you like fries with that at all? It's like, you're about to check out. This is the best we've got. And if you don't get that, if you don't get your fries, there's no happy ending. The airbag's not on your lap at the end of a crash. Well, guess what? The crash was not severe enough to take you out. And the acid test for this is, in the aftermath of a crash, it's been loud, it's been upsetting, it's been violent and brutal and chaotic and all of those things. If your brains are intact to the extent that you are able to write the car company a letter, then they didn't need to deploy. It really is that simple. And instead of firing off an indignant missive, "Dear sir, I wish to complain about not getting my happy ending. I crashed recently and your airbags stayed in their box," why don't you write the car company a letter of sincere thanks for saving your life? Because that's certainly what I would do. This technology is, I read all these brochures of all the time about cars. It's an occupational hazard, right? And they talk about technology. And when they talk about technology to consumers, they talk about Bluetooth and a wireless charging pad for the phone and all of this other kind of trivial stuff. The real impressive technology in cars is stuff that you don't see. It's the decision-making algorithm that can fire into all these different chains of events and just go, you need the airbag, you need it now. It's only been less than the blink of an eye, and all of a sudden, this life-saving technology comes out. You go, blah, blah, blah. There's an afterwards. In the 1970s, there would not have been. So if you're in a crash, you don't get your airbags, it just hasn't been severe enough, and that is really the bottom line. I'm John Cadogan. I hope this helps. Thanks for watching.